The Council of Nicaea invented modern Christianity. While this objection is certainly a common one, unfortunately the facts are not on its side. The three main problems that, for those of you who encounter this sort of objection, need to point out to the individual who's leveling it, because A, it's coming from someone who has taken someone else's word for it, not necessarily done the research on their own. But since we don't want to model that very same example and you just taking my word for it, let's not just say you're wrong. Let's take the time to explain what actually happened and see if that had anything to do with the foundation of the core claims that Christianity is based on. First of all, if we're going to look to any source on Christianity, obviously its own would be a first, but a second and an ideal one would be if the enemies of Christianity are willing to acknowledge certain facts about Jesus, not because they're more objective, but because if they have to admit something, it probably has that much more evidence that would put their careers on the line as scholars to deny. And both atheist and agnostic scholars, of which I'll mention here in a moment, acknowledge that Jesus' death, deity, and resurrection from the dead were all established as authoritative tradition, meaning that Christians believe this as a universal principle within months of the crucifixion, not 300 years later. So the claim for people to say that Nicaea in the 4th century AD was where Christianity officially began, and it was just a mixture of other religions and claims that ultimately came to a head after a heated debate, is not from any reliable historical source. It is from the Da Vinci Code, which I don't recommend as a historical narrative. It doesn't even advertise itself as such, though it does try to undercut and say that these are based on actual historical claims. If we're going to understand what actually happened at Nicaea, it's a good idea to read through what was called the Rudder, which was a collection of notes that were taken at the event themselves, and also, most importantly, or itself. But even more importantly, given that this is first-hand information, if we're looking to what happened at Nicaea, the individuals who were there would obviously take priority over a cheesy remake film. The Council of Nicaea, according to the Rudder, had nothing to do with the canon, which books were in the Bible and which doctrines were taught. It was how Jesus was both God and man. And the reason why that needed to be clarified is first to understand a key fact of church history. From the time of the church's foundation all the way to this period in the Roman Empire, Christianity had been outlawed as a capital offense, and this may seem as strange to people living in the world we do today, unless you're in a Muslim country or a communist dictatorship. But the reason for that was when you claimed that you were a part of a particular religion, that was your code of ethics, and what universally bound the Roman Empire was its adherence to Greek paganism. And of course, they Latinized the terms for the gods, but it was all essentially the same. If you claimed to be from another religion, say for example in the East, the Parthian Empire didn't adhere to the Greek gods, then they were accountable to different laws. And that unknown set of ethics, given that they didn't have the resources to study them in the way that we do today. They weren't sure if they considered things like murder or theft or rape or any of these other things as crimes, or at least as things to avoid if you didn't want to incur the wrath of the gods. So when a bunch of Christians, quote unquote, started walking around claiming that Caesar wasn't Lord, Zeus wasn't Lord, that Jesus of Nazareth, the God of Israel, was Lord, they didn't know enough about Jesus to understand his ethics, and they considered them rebels against the current legal system. Other emperors did this more out of spite and hurt pride than others, and there were ebbs and flows in the persecution. But if we're going to understand what led up to the Edict of Toleration, where the predecessor to Constantine himself said, okay, it's no longer illegal to be a Christian. It wasn't made the state religion until much later. The Roman Empire essentially allowed for the first time Christians to gather in a public setting without fear of being tortured or killed for their beliefs as enemies of the state. Now, when the Council of Nicaea was finally adjourned and sponsored by the Roman monarchy, I guess you could say is the term, Then you start to ask, what did they discuss? Well, a certain individual by the name of Arius, whom the council was adjourned to address, had two or three other followers on his side that used an assumption from his culture and background that, of course, Jesus couldn't be God and man at the same time, because man is not God. They threw out, of course, a lot of scripture and used very twisted methods in handling the Bible to prove these things, and he was overwhelmingly dismissed as a heretic. The cult known as Arianism is seen in various forms today. Jehovah's Witnesses would be an example of them. But when we're asked the question, what ultimately was the result of the Council of Nicaea? Well, the Da Vinci Code, documentaries like Zeitgeist and other ill-informed sources would say, oh, that's where Christianity was invented. It was basically a Jewish group of individuals that dominated the day, and some taught reincarnation, a la Shirley MacLaine. Some taught that there were many gods, a la Zeitgeist. Others claimed that there was one God, and this was ultimately the position that won the day, a la Da Vinci Code. What actually happened, according to the notes that were taken there itself, again, according to the rudder, which is the same term used to describe the oar at the end of the ship that directs its direction. Redundant, yes, perhaps, but note that source. We're told that it was a debate between Arius, who was overwhelmingly in the minority, and all of the Christians that were able to make the trip, i.e. not crippled and unable to travel on account of the injuries they had suffered beforehand, were ultimately just sitting there with the Bibles, by the way, the same Bibles that we're reading today, and telling him, prove this. Point this out. No, what about that passage? What about this? And he was curb stomped doctrinally. Now, of course, Constantine wanted to get this matter resolved in both parties' favor, not in favor of the truth. But Arius managed to gain his sympathies, and the cult of Arianism took a spike ahead of the church. And if it wasn't for the faithful remnant that stuck to Scripture, it would have died out. So the Council of Nicaea was an address of a cult that was arising in northern Africa known as Arianism, and it was soundly debunked in a series of public debates. It had nothing to do with the Bible, what books were or weren't in it. It had nothing to do with the core claims or beliefs of Christianity. And according to the following quote that I'll list for you here now, they would regard the creed that is given to us in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 7, as not something that Paul necessarily founded, but something that he repeated, a la his own words, according to these atheist and liberal scholars, as foundational information that dates to within months of the first Easter. According to James D.G. Dunn of the Jesus Seminar, in referring to this tradition, he said, we can be entirely confident it was formulated as tradition within months of Jesus' death. James D.G. Dunn is not a Christian. Michael Goulder, from the same source, said Paul received the tradition, that is, he was taught it at his conversion perhaps 2 years after Jesus' death. So this is not 300 years after Jesus' death. Referring to 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, this indubitably goes back to the oldest phase of all in the history of primitive Christianity. This is according to Ulrich Wilkins, again, not a Christian. Gerd Ludemann, the elements in the tradition are to be dated within the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. Paul Barnett notes 2 or 3 years the first Easter. Richard Burridge and Graham Gould both affirmed that it was only a few years after Jesus' death. Robert Funk, also from the Jesus Seminar, says 2 or 3 years at most. And if you go to the rudder, you can find out exactly what was discussed at the Council of Nicaea. But I guarantee you it wasn't what teachings were in Christianity. That had been established within at least 2 to 3 years, if not months, of the first Easter. Not according to me, but according to even atheist historians that have to acknowledge these things because the data is just so overwhelming. But if you're going to run into these sort of people, make sure that you do know what you're talking about. And if an individual has made these claims to you, perhaps in an authoritative setting like a college classroom, here are the facts. You can look at the rudder. You don't have to take my word for it. We don't want to make the same mistake and say, well, this person said it online, therefore it's true. No, then I'd be saying the same thing as Zeitgeist, the Da Vinci Code, and all these other bogus sources. Go to the historical documents. Look at the actual teachings and history of Christianity, and you'll realize that Arius and his denial of Jesus' deity was not only clarified from the Bibles they already had, but didn't add or take away from anything that Christianity already was or currently is as a result of this public debate and engagement. Thank you for your time. If you have sincere questions or want to know proper spelling or citation for some of these sources, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to engage with you there. If you have sincere questions perhaps about other issues in relation to or in some other form regarding where Christianity may or may not have been founded a long time after the fact, again, the comments are welcome for that as well. Sincerity is the only standard. I'll look forward to discussing more of these top 30 objections with you very soon. Until next time, God bless you.